Hi guys, it's me ChazraHD and welcome to this race reaction stream for the 2020 Sakhir Grand Prix. And the Grand Prix wasn't as exciting in terms of on-track racing as I thought it would be. But as you'll see in a moment, if you haven't seen the race result of the race at all, the result we got was absolutely fucking mental. And quite emotional, to be honest, for, certain people like myself. For certain drivers who did well. But, yeah, one absolutely incredible result. Again, not the best Grand Prix in terms of wheel-to-wheel racing, but, I mean, those last 20 laps, in terms of who was going to finish on the podium, it was just, who knew what was going to happen? It was absolutely great drama. Not necessarily great racing, as I've already said, but hopefully you guys have finally calmed down after that Grand Prix. It took me quite a while, to be honest, to calm myself down after being so, on the edge of my seat in those last 20 laps. So hopefully you guys have been able to calm down, gather your thoughts as you come to the stream, and with me react to all of the crazy things that happened, especially in that last 20-30 laps of the Grand Prix. But before, as we normally do, get onto every single team and review how they did, let's first start off with the results of the 2020 Sakhir Grand Prix. And look at that. What an absolutely mental finishing order that is. So, taking his first victory in Formula 1, Sergio Perez. I've wanted to say that for fucking ever. I will admit, I absolutely love Sergio Perez. Everyone who knows me knows I do. Always, supported the guy. I've always thought the guy was severely underrated. Always thought the guy deserved, a chance to be in a team that could maybe provide him to do this. I know for him to do this, get a race win in a car that we know, pace-wise, should not be getting a race win. Just incredible. Just absolutely incredible. And he, I won't say deserved the Grand Prix victory today. I think considering what he's done in Formula 1 since he came in 2011, I think he definitely deserved at least one race win. Because he's been truly incredible ever since he came into Formula 1 with the machinery he's had to work with. Esteban Ocon second. After all that shit I was talking about Ocon at the end of the stream yesterday. And then he goes and gets his best result ever and his first Formula 1 podium. There you go. Lance Stroll third. Great result for him. Carlos Sainz fourth. Daniel Ricciardo fifth. Alex Albon rather sixth. Daniel Kvyat seventh. Bottas eighth and Russell ninth. We'll get into Mercedes in a minute. They really did throw it away big time. Lando Norris P10. Gasly P11. Vettel 12th. Then Giovinazzi, Raikkonen, Magnussen, Aitken and Fittipaldi rounding out the field. And then retiring from the race, Nicholas Latifi, Max Verstappen, and Charles Leclerc. So there you go. That is your results for the Sakhir Grand Prix. Now let's get into the teams. So first off, Mercedes. Now, up until the safety car that came out with about, 20 to 25 laps to go, Mercedes were in a extremely comfortable position. Russell, who, was leading the race, got into the lead at turn 1, was leading the race phenomenally. He was so comfortable in the lead, and especially after that first and what seemed to be only round of pit stops for Mercedes, Russell looked very comfortable and looked as though he was going to win the Grand Prix by, 2 or 3 seconds. And was not really under a massive threat from Valtteri Bottas. And for the team, it was looking very comfortable. Then the safety car came out for Jack Aitken's front wing on the racing line on the exit of the final corner. It had to come out because it was right on the racing line and there was no way the marshals could go and retrieve that safely, even with a VSC. So they had to throw out the safety car. And then, when the two Mercedes come into the pits, which they had to do, by the way, if you're wondering why they came in, they had to do that because they didn't want to be at risk from fresher tired people behind, in case something happened. So they did do the right thing and they did have enough of a gap, to pit and come out still in a 1-2 position. So they weren't wrong for doing what they did. But the problem is, when the pit crew came out, they, I think, rushed out into the box with, a load of tyres and basically, didn't know what tyres they'd actually come out with and who for. Which is why Russell had to come in again, a lap later, to put on another set of tyres because he had, I think, Valtteri Bottas's tyres on. And then Bottas had a older set, I think, of hard tyres put on. I think that's what happened. If anyone wants to correct me, you can. But, yeah, it's just a complete fuck-up on the pit stop. Put them down in 4th and 5th. Then on the restart of the race, with about 20 laps to go, or 25 laps to go, Russell got past Bottas. Bottas fell back and finished ultimately in 8th place because he was on old tyres and there's no way he was going to fight his way back through the field, I guess, which is why he finished there. His rear tyres were absolutely gone towards the end of the Grand Prix. But Russell was still able to come through and go and win that Grand Prix. He then got past Stroll, got past Ocon, and was closing down on Sergio Perez by, 3 or 4 tenths a lap? And that would have been enough, I think, for him to win the Grand Prix. But then, with a few laps to go, Mercedes come on the radio. Bono, specifically, came on the radio and said, George, sorry, but we have a puncture. You need to come into the pits to replace your tyre. That was so gutting for Russell. And I will admit, I am gutted for him because I think he absolutely did deserve to win today. The way he drove all weekend was superb. And I know, of course, it is the best car. It's not exactly the hardest car on the grid to get used to. But to come in, with not that much notice, almost get pole position, but then get into the lead and lead the race for a long time and be comfortable and, should have won the race, even without, even with, rather, the whole pit stop thing. He was still in a position where he should have won the race, but, then the puncture happened. To do all that, this weekend is absolutely incredible, and he did deserve to win today, but it just wasn't to be. I guess just like him finishing the points at Imola. Just wasn't to be. I'm hoping, though, this bad luck, I won't say the thing at Imola was bad luck, but, him not getting the result he should, I hope that does come to an end soon in his Formula 1 career, because it's not something he wants to be carrying around for a long time, because it won't, obviously, help his career, but he drove great, he really did, and if Mercedes are going to put someone in their car when either Hamilton or Bottas leave, this guy has to be in that car. Has to be. I mean, if he can be that good with that little time in the car, imagine what he could be like after a full pre-season testing program and then go into the season. He could really be, a proper great driver. And I've always thought that this guy is a very special driver, in my opinion, and he's definitely up there with your Max Verstappens and Charles Leclerc's in terms of talent. Hopefully, he does get a chance again. Maybe he'll get a chance at the next Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi. But, yeah, even though he did finish 9th, I think he did prove this weekend that all the hype around him is absolutely justified. So, great performance by him. Shame that he didn't win the race, but these things happen, unfortunately. Just one of those days, I'm afraid, for Mercedes and for Russell. Next up is Red Bull. What an absolutely shit race it was for Red Bull. So Max Verstappen on the first lap was an unfortunate party in that collision between Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez. He didn't really have anywhere to go on the outside of turn 4, which is why he went into the barriers. So yeah, he couldn't really do anything much about what he did in that incident. It was really Leclerc and Perez who caused all of that to happen. So hard to know what Max could have done today, which is a shame. But for Alex Albon, I thought Alex Albon today was, he said, that the car was not raceable, I think, during the race on team radio, and that the car had very slow straight line speed. But then I do remember him saying after qualifying that Red Bull had put a bit more wing on their car than other teams had, so that's Red Bull's fault for doing that. Yeah, Red Bull were just really poor. Alex Albon, I thought, was poor. I mean, on fresh soft tyres, by the way, at the end, he really should have finished a bit higher than 6th place. He could, I mean, if he was on his game properly, or if you had, you know, a Sergio Perez in there on those tyres, he probably would have finished up in 3rd or 4th place. But, you know, couldn't even get past Daniel Ricciardo, who was on quite a bit older tyres, but also harder tyres. So yeah, just shows you how poor Albon really has been this weekend. And after, you know, Sergio Perez winning the race, how can Red Bull keep Albon in that car now? How can they? And they shouldn't, by the way. They should not. Albon, you know, I've said this a million times. Nice guy, but he's not good enough. Sergio Perez has to be in that car for 2021 and beyond, possibly. Now, I understand why people say he won't be in that car. Not that they don't want him to be in that car, but I understand why people say he won't be because of, you know, Red Bull don't want to admit and basically have Sergio Perez showcase how shit the Red Bull car really is. Not that Perez is, you know, bad or anything, but just showcase that, you know, the Red Bull car that Max Verstappen has is a car literally designed solely towards him, and that's not representative of how quick Red Bull are. But, after today especially, we've been saying this for weeks, but especially after today, how the fuck can Red Bull not put Sergio Perez in their car? They would be absolutely insane not to put Perez in their car. And it is purely down to Helmut Marko being a stubborn old twat. Let's be honest, that's what it is. He is so stubborn and so egotistical that he will not allow the Red Bull driver program to suffer any, you know, slight against its name. He will not allow that at all. He will not give in to the clear evidence that keeping Alex Albon is clearly the wrong decision. He will not do what is right and what is best for Red Bull. And I get, you know, he wants to just have Red Bull Driver Academy drivers in a Red Bull car. I get that. But right now, considering the options they have for that seat, and, you know, they obviously could have gone for Pierre Gasly, but they signed Gasly to AlphaTauri, which, to be honest, I think for Gasly and his career is probably the best thing, because I think Gasly just operates better in that team and is more confident in that team. And I think Gasly's going to leave the Red Bull program anyway for 2022, where he'll probably go to Alpine, or what is now Renault, to partner most likely Fernando Alonso. But, you know, if they weren't going to put Gasly in that team, all the other options are simply not good enough. So you've got to go for Sergio Perez. You've got to. There's no other option for the Red Bull Driver Academy, again, except for Gasly, considering what Gasly has done this season, to put a driver in that car. But we know what Red Bull are going to do, because it can never be Red Bull's fault. It can never be Red Bull's fault. It's always someone else's fault as to why they don't win a Grand Prix, or they don't win a championship, or they don't compete for a championship. It can never be that the Red Bull Driver Academy is not producing as good a talent now as it was 5 years ago. Can't be that. It can't be that Red Bull, the reason they've been so far off Mercedes, it can't be because they produced a car that's just simply not good enough. No, can't be that. It must be just because, Honda are not producing enough power, and because of the DAS system Mercedes have and all of that. You'll notice again, this trend, it's never Red Bull's fault. They will never admit that they haven't done well enough. They'll always, in their mind, they've always done the best they could, which is complete bullshit, I'm afraid. And when it comes to this driver decision, if Red Bull pick Albon, that's not them making the best decision. That's them not wanting to lose face and their own pride, rather than going for clearly the best option available. You want to win in Formula 1, you have to pick the best in class. You have to. And if you look at who's available, Sergio Perez is the best person out there. So go for him. What is the fucking wait? Just go for him. It makes no sense to go for Alex Albon, for that sake. Absolutely no sense. Anyway, let's move on from Red Bull. Go on to Ferrari. I'll come to you guys in a moment. Hear what you guys have to say about that, and Mercedes as well. Ferrari, I don't think Ferrari were going to have a race today that was really going to be considered successful, because even though Charles Leclerc finished in 4th in qualifying, he was always going to fall back because the Ferrari is so horrifically slow in a straight line. But once Leclerc was out on the first lap, it was game over for Ferrari. Sebastian Vettel, of course, was down in, 13th, 14th. Again, he was not going to ever get into the points unless there was enough retirements, because the Ferrari just doesn't have enough power to fight its way up to those positions. And yeah, Sebastian was busy fighting the Williamses, Haases, and Alfa Romeo. So yeah, Ferrari was just absolutely terrible today. By the way, just to update you guys, Charles Leclerc has been given a 3-place grid penalty for the final Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi, which initially if that is that decision was announced at the time, I probably would have disagreed with it after my initial reaction to that incident of Leclerc and Perez making contact. But after looking back a couple times, yeah, Charles Leclerc was at fault for that accident. So, into turn 4, I think, Verstappen, Perez, and Bottas were 3 wide at times. And then Perez and Bottas were then side by side into turn 4. And then Charles Leclerc, as Max Verstappen, I think, said well, just unnecessarily dived up the inside and hit Sergio Perez. Now, Sergio Perez, I won't say Sergio left the door open. He didn't really have an option not to. Valtteri Bottas was on the inside of the corner. And Perez was rightfully so looking at Valtteri Bottas rather than where Charles Leclerc was, because Leclerc was not really in the picture. Leclerc just threw his car in there, hoping to get a position or two, and it ended up exactly how it was always going to end up, in quite a big collision. And it's a miracle that Sergio Perez, continued in the Grand Prix, because that damage was quite, not the damage, but the contact rather was quite significant. You'd think it would be enough to put him out of the race, but clearly not. But yeah, Charles Leclerc was just way too ambitious. Should have. There was nothing wrong with him being on the inside of that corner, but trying to pass Verstappen and Perez at that point was just being way too over aggressive for me. He should have just been a bit more cautious on the brakes rather than just throwing it in there hoping to grab a couple positions. And yeah, as I've said, nothing Sergio Perez could do. He was watching Bottas, which is what he should be doing, and then goes to turn in properly to the corner, and then Charles Leclerc hits him because Leclerc's coming from miles back. So yeah, Leclerc was definitely at fault for that. But yeah, Ferrari, no points scored. That's what we expected, but the weekend was a bit better pace-wise, I think, than we expected, because obviously Charles Leclerc was up in 4th place. Now, that was probably because Leclerc was so great, but at least they showed a bit more than what we thought they would. Anyway, before we go on to the midfield teams and talk about that 3-team battle for 3rd in the Constructors and how they all got on and how it's all looking after today's Grand Prix, let me come to you guys in the chat to see what you guys have to say about the top 3 teams and just how they did. Crystal Racing, stubborn old twat, you absolute goat, Chaz. It's true though, isn't it? It is pure stubbornness. It's just, I don't want to get into politics, but I think anyone who is in the UK right now will relate. It does remind me a lot of the current government we have in the UK. Evidence clearly showing that there's another, a better option out there, but you still stubbornly go with what you think is the right thing, even though you know that the evidence points otherwise. It's like that. It's just pure stubbornness, and them keeping Albon, it's not going to pay off. Alex Albon is not, it's not like Alex is this great talent, but just needs more time. Alex, he's good. He's not a bad driver, but he's not going to be, Carlos Sainz or Max Verstappen. he is, at best, in Formula One, a midfield driver. Now, yes, Sergio Perez has been a midfield driver for, say, most of his career, but there has been plenty of times where Sergio has gone above that level into, say, that second tier of, very good drivers, like your Daniel Ricciardos, drivers like that, Carlos Sainz. He's been, able to get up onto that level, like today, and a lot of the last few races. I just don't see what Red Bull gain. What do Red Bull gain from keeping Albon? I mean, I know someone was saying on my Discord that, Red Bull don't want Perez in the car because it'll expose them, and I get that. But in terms of results and that, what do Red Bull gain from keeping Albon? They don't gain anything. They're just being stubborn when it's clear, absolutely dead clear, that the evidence suggests otherwise. Maybe Albon brings money to the team. Well, look at Sergio Perez. How much fucking money does he bring? No disrespect to your question, by the way. It's a very good point. About, maybe that's why Albon is in the team for next year, possibly. That's from, was it Ruff Air? I think it is. Yeah, that's a good point, but, let's say that was the reason. Sergio Perez, look at the amount of fucking money he has in his disposal with, was it Carlos Slim behind him? He's always had tons and tons of money, and basically the whole of Mexico behind him. I mean, I don't see why that would be a reason. And as well, it's Red Bull. They don't really need the money, do they? Right, let's find a few more comments and we'll get on to the next few teams. Sam says, Albon got a podium in Mugello because Max crashed out, and Bahrain was because Perez had a failure. Exactly. And, it was great to see Albon finally get that podium, but at the end of the day, has Albon really deserved a podium in his F1 career? I don't think he has. I don't think he's ever driven well enough to deserve a podium. So, I mean, he's maybe driven well enough to deserve some top 5 finishes here and there, but has he ever done well enough to get a podium? I don't think he has. Yeah. Right, a few more comments. Let's find some good ones from you guys. Will F1. Well, Brazil would have been a lucky podium if Hamilton hadn't hit him. I know Albon passed Vettel, but before the safety car, Vettel was miles ahead. Well, yeah, the only reason Albon got a chance to pass Vettel was because Bottas retired. And also, let's not forget, even though Albon passed Vettel, the two Ferraris were probably quicker, but then had their own collision. So, if Albon got a podium in Brazil, a lot of things were having to go right for him to be in that position. Tonka says, you can't just go along with the junior program and abandon it when it suits you. Red Bull have made commitments to the junior drivers and they have made commitments to Red Bull. I get that. I really do. And I understand your point. But I think going with Sergio Perez does not mean you're abandoning your program. That doesn't mean that at all. I think what they've got to do is just, admit that at the moment, and it will change, give it 5 years, Red Bull will probably have, your Vettel or Verstappen-like talents coming through the program again. But at the moment, there just isn't that proper star quality coming through. I mean, yeah, you've got Pierre Gasly, who's been great this season, but, he's the absolute best of that bunch out of him, Albon, Kvyat, you know what I mean? So, there's nothing wrong with going with Sergio Perez. I mean, look back in the day when they went with David Coulthard in 2005. They didn't have to go with David Coulthard. They could have easily gone with 2 Red Bull driver program drivers then. And it would have been what? Christian Klein and Tony Liuzzi. Or in 2007 when they hired Mark Webber. They didn't have to go for Mark Webber. They could have easily put Liuzzi alongside Coulthard or Sebastian Vettel, even though it would have been probably a bit too soon. But they realised that, the quality currently in the Red Bull driver program is not good enough. We need to go for someone outside the program. That's what they need to do. They just need to, accept that there's not enough quality in their ranks to fill a seat, good, and to be good enough filling that seat currently, and go for Perez. And by the way, if they go for Perez, doesn't mean Sergio Perez is going to be at Red Bull for 5 years. It's probably going to be a 2 or 3 year thing at most. You don't have to keep Sergio Perez for a long time. Just again, 2 or 3 years, and then, give it till 2023-4. And then maybe they've got a driver who's, a Vettel or Verstappen or even a Ricciardo quality like driver that they can then put in the team if Verstappen leaves, and then if there's another quality driver out there in the program, they can put him in there and then be all good again. It doesn't mean, if Sergio Perez gets hired by Red Bull, this doesn't mean that the Red Bull program is dead and that they're completely abandoning ship. They just again, they need to admit to themselves, really, that, there's just not enough talent coming through for us, and when I say us, I mean Red Bull, from their point of view, to be at our absolute strongest. I mean, it's like, look at a football team or a soccer team if you're American or Canadian or Australian. You can't just rely on academy players. And I know there's football clubs out there, soccer clubs out there that do play a lot of academy players, like Barcelona, for example, back in the day. They used to play a lot of players who were from the academy. But ultimately, you can't have every single piece be within the academy, because your academy is not going to be at all times good enough to keep you as a sports team good enough. And, eventually you're going to have to, when the talent dips, you're going to have to go for people outside of the system. That's what you're going to have to do. I mean, look at Barcelona, for example. 10 years ago, Barcelona could have fielded a starting 11 entirely from the Barcelona Academy, and they would have won the Champions League quite easily with that starting 11, and I think they did. But if you look at Barcelona now, if they fielded just a starting 11 full of their academy players that are at the club right now, Barcelona wouldn't even finish in the top 4 of their league, or even top 6. And that's why Barcelona have ended up going the route of signing players, who are from other clubs or from other countries, because they realised that their academy just isn't good enough anymore. Or maybe not anymore, but at the moment. That's what Red Bull need to do. They need to just, go for a couple years with an outside option, and then hope by the time Perez leaves that it all comes back round again. Right. Let's read one final one, and then we'll get to McLaren Renault Racing Point. Jules Elbers, but do you think they will put Sergio Perez in the car? Do I think they will? No, because they've always been extremely... Red Bull have always been very egotistical and stubborn. They're not going to do it, most likely. I really hope they do, and I don't really see how they can justify putting Albon in that car over Perez. I mean, I'd love to see the PR statement they release when it's announced that Albon's in the car. I'd love to see the statement, because it's going to be a load of bullshit as to why they've kept him. But realistically, no, I don't think they will put him in the car. Should they? Absolutely, 1 trillion %. 1 trillion %. Fantastico. How will Ferrari do in Abu Dhabi? Probably a bit better than in the last couple races, because Abu Dhabi, you can get away with having a car that's a bit draggy, especially in the final sector. So they'll probably be, between 6th and 12th on the grid, I'd imagine. They won't score that many points, though, because it's Ferrari, but, you know, it'll be a bit stronger for them, pace-wise. Right. I think now we'll move on to that 3-team battle for third in the Constructors. First off, McLaren. I said yesterday McLaren just had to keep doing what they've been doing recently, which is doing the best they can in the races, and I think today that's what they did. You know, Carlos Sainz, after the safety car restart at the start, he was in third place for a while, and I thought drove superbly today. He really did. I think deserved probably a podium. He was so strong pace-wise, and lately has been so strong and has really shown why Ferrari selected him for 2021 and beyond, because the guy just keeps getting better, and he is, I think, at that level that a Ferrari driver needs to be at to be successful. So I think absolutely he deserves to be in a Ferrari for, you know, the next few years, hopefully. Yeah, he drove great. Just a shame about the whole VSC and safety car. You know, him pitting right after the virtual safety car came out for Nicholas Latifi's parked Williams. That cost him, because then he came out quite a bit behind Perez, Ocon and Stroll. And then when the safety car came out, got stuck a bit behind Valtteri Bottas and got held up. And then couldn't really get his McLaren after Stroll quick enough to get a podium, which is what, again, he deserved, I think, today. But 12 points is still pretty good, considering it probably should have been a bit more. Lando Norris, though, he started at the back, finished in, 10th place in the end. I think he drove well. The only problem was, I think he probably did start on the wrong compound. He should have started on the medium, because his soft tyres were dead after 20 laps, and that really did hamper his Grand Prix. But I think he did drive well, considering what happened in qualifying, and of course started from the back and all of that. But 13 points for McLaren. Now, that is a pretty good points haul, but as we'll get onto in a moment with Racing Point, that might not be enough, considering what Racing Point did today. But yeah, I thought McLaren, I think they did the best they could. I think they did the best they could with the circumstances of the race. Maybe they could, you know, should have left Carlos Sainz out there. Maybe, but, you know, Carlos Sainz had been out quite a long time on his tyres and he might not have lasted. So, hard to say what would have happened if Carlos Sainz had been left out. But, yeah, I think McLaren did the best they could today and have done really most of the season. Next up, though, is Renault. Esteban Ocon finishing in second place. I give him an absolute lashing at the end of the stream yesterday, saying that ultimately he's just not lived up to the hype and has not been really that good compared to the hype. And then goes and finishes in second place. What a drive. Yeah, he drove really well. Did benefit a lot, of course, from Sainz and Ricciardo pitting and the AlphaTauris pitting and all of that. But I thought he drove pretty well from the second half of the race. And did he deserve the podium? Probably not, but he drove well enough for a top 5 finish. So yeah, it was a good drive, very good drive. And I think if you look at his F1 career, he probably has deserved a podium. You know, if you go back to 2017, for example, there were a couple races in there where he easily could have had a podium. If, you know, maybe things had gone his way slightly more. So I think, you know, this is a deserved result. He was kind of on for this again back when he was at Force India in 2017. Again, today I don't think he quite deserved it, but he did drive very well. We cannot deny that at all. But Daniel Ricciardo finishing in 5th place. Now, that is a pretty decent points haul for Renault. 28 points. Because yesterday I said they needed Renault to score about, at least 20 points to be right in the hunt for the final race for third in the Constructors. But again, because of what Racing Point have done today, it's pretty much over for Renault. And they they have only themselves to blame, because they've had plenty of times this season the potential and the car to score enough points at certain races to be in third in the Constructors, but just bottled it. Today, Renault really fucked up on pit strategy with Daniel Ricciardo. Pitted Ricciardo a lap too late for the first round of pit stops. Ricciardo was called in too late to the box when he was already past the pit entry line, and that cost him compared to Kvyat, and that held him up quite a bit. And then Ricciardo was, I think, mistakenly brought in just after the VSC came out, or came back in again, sorry. So Renault, again, costing themselves, and have done quite a few times this season. Again, good points haul today, 28 points. That is a good points haul. But compared to Racing Point, what they've done, it just isn't quite good enough. And I think, and we'll get onto it later, I think Renault are going to finish where they are in the Constructors, because I don't see them being that quick in Abu Dhabi. Because if you look at the track layout, it doesn't really suit their car. It is a car, or a layout rather, that is more suited, I would say, to the Racing Point or McLaren, which seems to have a bit more downforce than the Renault. So, yeah, even though great result today for Renault, I think the bell has tolled on their campaign. Finished third. But Racing Point have, when they needed to, and they really, really needed to, produced a performance of a lifetime to get into. And they have now officially gone into third in the Constructors with an absolutely incredible result. Sergio Perez winning the Sakhir Grand Prix with Lance Stroll in third place. That's Racing Point's first win, Perez's first win, the first double podium, I think, for this team. I think it's the first double podium for this Silverstone-based team. If you go back through the years when they were Force India and Jordan and all of that, I think it's their first double podium, I think, since the 1995 Canadian Grand Prix, when they were Jordan, and that was Barrichello and Irvine finishing behind Jean Alesi in that famous win. If anyone wants to fact check me, you can. But I think that was the last double podium for the Silverstone-based team. But yeah, what an incredible result. Sergio Perez as well, what a drive. Gets took out on the first lap, pits, goes to the back, fights his way through. Did benefit a lot from the virtual safety car, if I can fucking speak. Sainz Ricciardo pitting and all of that, and the AlphaTauris, he did benefit a lot, but still had to make the move on his teammate Lance Stroll, who was definitely always going to go to the end of the race on the tyres he was on. Same with Esteban Ocon. The Perez did drive very well, let's not doubt that. He did drive well. Did benefit a lot, though, of course, from the two Mercedes suffering what they did. So, again, he didn't deserve the victory today in terms of pure driving, but I think overall, if you look at Sergio Perez's career, this has been a long time coming. If we go all the way back to the 2012 Malaysian Grand Prix, for example, a race that was just crazy, and Perez in the Sauber drove an incredible race. He should have won that race, but made a mistake, which was not helped, and I think was caused basically by the team radio that he received for him not to push too hard, to think of the result and think of the position we're in, and then he ended up making a mistake. Sergio Perez was really on for a victory there, but didn't really happen, didn't really materialize. But if you look at all the podiums he's had since, all the great performances he's put in, this was a long time coming that he was going to get this result. And thank the fucking Lord he has got it now, when, he really does need to prove, not that he really does, but, just to further nail down why he should be on the grid for next year and why he should be in a Red Bull. And I think, honestly, after today, things and circumstances might actually start to change now, because he won this race. because it's a weird thing in Formula One. You know, you can get podiums and that can help your case. But when you win a Grand Prix, that tends to really just, you know, transform your life and career. So that might actually help Sergio a lot. But yeah, an amazing result. And I will admit, when he crossed the line to win, I did celebrate. I really loved Perez for such a long time, been a big defender of him. And I'm so happy to have been proved right about how great Perez has been driving for so long and how he is such an underrated driver, such a good driver, and should never be off the grid. He is, without a doubt, this season been one of the top 10 drivers of the season. And I might actually, if he keeps this up in Abu Dhabi, you could argue that he's in the top 6 or 7 of the season in terms of pure driving performances. It's been incredible, he has. And even, you know, seeing, you know, clips and pictures of him on the podium did make me honestly well up a bit. I felt a bit emotional because I've been so supportive of Perez. And I've always wanted to see him do well. And whenever I watch a Grand Prix, I'm always looking out for Sergio Perez because I always want him to just prove everyone who doubts him wrong because I know how good he is. And thankfully today, even though, yes, he was a bit lucky, he proved everyone wrong and showed that, you know, forget all the money he brings. He is easily good enough to be on the grid. Easily good enough. And I hope he does stay. For Lance Stroll didn't really do that much today. He made a decent start, was in that fight for the podium with Sainz, Ricciardo and the 2 AlphaTauris and Ocon. He could have made it a Racing Point 1-2 if he could have found his way past Esteban Ocon on the fresher and softer tyres, but just couldn't do it before his teammate then passed him and then Ocon. The Stroll probably could have made it a Racing Point 1-2 just to solidify Racing Point's position in third in the Constructors, but I think Stroll mostly, except for that, I think you could argue, did the best he could. And I don't think you can really fault him today. But yeah, what an absolutely incredible day for this team. And this team, you know, for the last few years, they've always done not just the best they could with what they have, resource-wise and financially. They've done way more than we thought was possible. And this season, even though they've got a bit more of a backing than they used to, and they do have, let's be honest, a remarkably similar car to the 2019 Mercedes car. You've got to say again, considering what they have and who they're going up against, they are doing remarkably well. They're about to beat McLaren, Renault and Ferrari in the Constructors, you know, for 2020. That is a phenomenal achievement. You cannot deny that. I don't care that the car is essentially a B car. I don't care. McLaren, Renault and Ferrari should still be ahead of this team, but they're not, because Racing Point are just so good at getting the best out of what they have as a team. And with them becoming Aston Martin next year, and they'll have even more money and resources, and you've got the new wind tunnel and all of that, I think this team is the team to look out for this decade, because if they can do what they did in the last decade, or the little, you know, money and all of that they had, God knows what they can do in the next 10 years. I think this team is going places. And well done to them. They really do deserve a victory after all they've done in Formula One when they were Force India and all of that. Should have had a victory in 2009 at the Belgian Grand Prix, of course. So yeah, they really do deserve this. Absolutely great. I'm so happy for Perez. So happy for Racing Point. What a story and what a great day. But before we get into the rest of the teams and the drivers and constructor standings, guys, let's see what you have to say about this 3-team battle in the Constructors. RD, do you think Racing Point are regretting letting Perez go? To be honest, I reckon if you try to get an honest answer from every single mechanic and engineer in that team, who would they rather have alongside Vettel for next year? Perez or Stroll? I think they would all Not all of them, but I think a majority of them would say Sergio Perez. We know why Lance Stroll is in the team for next year, because his dad owns and runs the team. We know that. That's just the way, not just Formula One is, that's just the way life is, just the way shit works out, I'm afraid. Right. Let's find a few more, then we'll get on to the final few teams. Find good ones here. Ronan Brady says, my opinion of Ocon has not changed. Yeah, for me it hasn't really. Again, it was a very good drive today, but let's not act like, you know, he was up in third the whole Grand Prix. I mean, if he was, then yeah, a great drive and maybe it could spur something. But he still hasn't been crystal this season quite what people were hyping him up to be. Hello to Gilbert in the chat. Crystal Racing says McLaren's car deserves fourth in the constructors on pure pace alone. Their strategy team deserves third, however. I agree. Yeah, if you look at pace, I'd probably say they don't deserve third. But if you look at how they've been able to maximize what they do on a Sunday, you'd have to say they've been the best out of those three teams. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame for McLaren. But hey, still one race left. You never know what could happen. You know, Racing Point could have what they had last week in Bahrain, double DNF, and then McLaren go and score 15 odd points, and then, you know, McLaren get third. It could easily happen. So don't count it out. I think Renault, they're out of it. I mean, maybe they'll finish fourth if McLaren have that type of race where they have a double DNF, but it's between Racing Point and McLaren for third, without a doubt. And to be honest, it has been most of the season. I mean, Renault in the early part of the season were nowhere. They really were nowhere until we got to Spa, I think it was. And then after that, Renault then hunted McLaren and Racing Point down and really closed the gap. And I'd have to say, since the midpoint of the season, Renault probably have been, in terms of point scoring, the best team out of those three. But I think simply Renault, again, they've made, you know, mistakes on strategy too many times this season. But I think ultimately what has cost them is the first, 6 races of this season. They just weren't quick enough. The only race where they were properly quick was the British Grand Prix. All the other races, they were barely getting, you know, 2 to 4 points at certain races. They just weren't really doing much of anything. And then suddenly at Spa, they go get 22 points or 23 points, I think it was. And then after that, they were just reeling off, you know, 15 points a race at least. Or, you know, around that. But those first 6 Grand Prix, Renault were nowhere compared to Racing Point and McLaren. Absolutely nowhere. So, yeah, Renault. I mean, we'll say it when we get to the season review, which, by the way, talking of season review, of course, next week is the last Grand Prix of the season. Stick around to the end of the stream because I've got something to kind of reveal to you guys in terms of content for next week. But if you look back at this season for Renault, you can only blame Renault for why they've not finished higher than 5th. It's got nothing to do with Racing Point having a Mercedes B car and all that bullshit. It's purely down to Renault, again, not fulfilling the potential they clearly have. I mean, look at last season. Renault should have really finished 4th last season. They were closer pace-wise at times to a podium than McLaren were. But it ended up McLaren being the team getting a podium that year and finishing 4th. Renault just don't have, as a team, what it takes to maximise results. They just don't have it. Right, let's find one final comment, and then we'll get on to the rest of the teams before we get to the end. Conker says Perez missed 2 races and Stroll had botched too many to count. Racing Point may give Red Bull trouble next year. They could have given him a lot of trouble this year if, like you said, if Stroll had been a bit more consistent, had not missed that Grand Prix he did at the Nürburgring, and Perez didn't miss the 2 races he did. Racing Point wouldn't be that far behind Red Bull. But let's be honest, if Red Bull did not have Max Verstappen, Red Bull would probably be 4th or 5th in the Constructors. They've been pretty bad this season. And I think anyone who thinks they haven't been is being entirely misled by the Red Bull narrative, and also how Max's car is literally a completely different car and is not representative of the Red Bull pace. Anyway, let's run through these final teams. AlphaTauri, kind of feel sorry for them because they were looking in a strong position before the virtual safety car came out for Latifi's car. They looked as though they were probably going to score, say, 10 to 12 points, which would have been a pretty good points haul for them. But because of the virtual safety car, then the safety car, and, you know, cars behind them having softer tyres and all of that, just didn't come off in the end. I mean, Pierre Gasly, the man on screen, somehow finishing outside the points, even though all weekend he had been consistently up there in the top 10. I will say, though, Daniel Kvyat, I thought this weekend was great. 6th in qualifying. In the race, he was up in a net 4th place for quite a bit of time. He drove great today and deserved, I think, a bit more than what he got in the end. He only got 6 points in the end. I think he deserved a bit more. But yeah, AlphaTauri, at least they scored some decent points. Should have been a bit more. But that's kind of been what they've been like in the last few Grand Prix. Had great qualifyings and then not quite delivered as much on the race day as they should. So, kind of disappointing, but there you go. Yeah, Daniel Kvyat, great drive. I really hope he does stay at AlphaTauri, but I don't think he will. But I think he should, because I still think he's good enough, and I don't really see what Red Bull gain with Yuki Tsunoda over Daniel Kvyat. I mean, if Daniel keeps up these qualifying performances, let's say if he does stay on for 2021, if he keeps up these qualifying performances, which has been his biggest weakness this season, if he keeps what he's doing up now into next season with what Gasly's been doing this season, AlphaTauri next season will be quite a, I won't say formidable team, but quite a quite a strong team. Quite a strong team. And if they were to, say, have a bit more power from the Honda power unit, they might be able to, you know, figure in that battle somehow with McLaren and Aston Martin and Alpine next year. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I thought AlphaTauri today, pace-wise, pretty good. Just didn't get the result they should have got. Alfa Romeo, they were the best out of the 3 shittest teams. I thought Antonio Giovinazzi did well, finishing ahead of Kimi Räikkönen around a track where Kimi has been so great in the past, even though it was a different layout still. You know, beating Räikkönen here is a very good result. I think Antonio's had a great weekend as well, out qualifying Räikkönen as well by quite a few positions. So, yeah, great weekend for Antonio. But, yeah, Alfa Romeo were never really going to finish any higher because they don't have the power, simply. If they had the power, I think Alfa would have finished in the points. Haas F1, yeah, they were never going to get anywhere near points. Obviously, they got a very poor car. Biggest news is that Romain Grosjean will not be racing in Abu Dhabi, and I have no problem with him not racing because he, you know, he should be thankful that he's still alive, and I think he is. But yeah, Romain, yeah, if we look back at his career, because his career obviously is now over, I don't think he is probably going to race again, at least for another year or so. He's definitely not racing again in Formula 1. I think Romain, you have to say, despite all of the memes and all of the crashes, you actually look at his results in his career, I think you'd have to say Romain Grosjean's had a pretty good F1 career. You know, few podiums, some decent finishes in the Drivers' Championship, you know, in a couple years. I think he's had a pretty good F1 career. Yeah, I don't think you could really I mean, he could have done quite a bit better, especially in his Lotus days in 2012 and 13. I think in those years, he probably could have won a couple races because he had, at times, some pace that was really strong. But in the end, if you look at his career, I think it's been pretty good. So I can't really complain that much. The only complaint is he could have done more. Probably could have won a race or two for that 2-year period where he had the car to. But he's had a pretty good career, so I can't really complain about it. Again, yeah, he's had loads of crashes. We get that, but he's not past Maldonado. He's definitely a lot better than that. I think it's really just the last couple years where he's really fallen off. And I used to be a big defender of Romain Grosjean pre-2018 because I kind of thought, maybe not as much as Sergio Perez, but I thought Romain was driving very well, was very quick in the Haas and also in the Lotus in 2015. I thought he was driving very well. I think, honestly, 2015 to 2017 was probably the peak of his career, which is a sad thing because he wasn't really in a good enough car to showcase how good he could be in terms of, podiums and that. But, yeah, I thought Romain around that period did pretty well. But, yeah, these last couple years have been pretty poor. And I think definitely he should have been dropped from Haas at the end of last year, to be honest. But, yeah, that's just the way it is, and that's what's happened. And, of course, with him not racing in Abu Dhabi, Pietro Fittipaldi will be racing, hopefully, with him not having a grid penalty, and now he's had a bit more time in the car, should be able to see a bit more of what he can actually do. So we'll see what he does. But, of course, he won't be racing for Haas next season. There'll be Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. By the way, congratulations to Mick Schumacher for winning the F2 World Championship. Can't wait to see what he does next year. And finally, Williams. The only thing I can say, I mean, they were slow, as usual, but the only thing I can say is I think Jack Aitken today really, and not today, but this weekend, I think has really shone. Because, first weekend, F1 weekend in a car that's not that great, obviously, handling-wise and all that. And he almost outperformed Nicholas Latifi. So I think he's had a pretty good weekend. But yeah, Williams, as usual, pretty shit. Now let's finally get on to the drivers and constructors standings with one race to go next week in Abu Dhabi. So here are the drivers standings after today's Grand Prix. Of course, Lewis Hamilton not racing this weekend, but still champion a couple races ago. Bottas second. Verstappen third. Perez up to fourth. Again, great season. Ricciardo fifth and then Leclerc sixth. Carlos Sainz in seventh. By the way, just shows you how great Carlos Sainz has been this season. And I think has been quite underrated this season. That, in the first half of the season had a lot of bad luck. And look at him now. He's only, 30 odd points, I think, or just under 30 points off fourth in the Drivers' Championship. And he was very unlucky in the first 10 races or so. So Carlos Sainz has had a great season. Do not let anyone make you think anything otherwise. Albon 8th, Norris 9th and Stroll in 10th. And 11th, Pierre Gasly. 12th, Ocon. 13th, Vettel. 14th, Kvyat. And then Hülkenberg, Raikkonen, Giovinazzi. Russell now to 18th, of course. And then Grosjean, Magnussen, Latifi, Aitken. And then, of course, Fittipaldi. But the constructors, here they are. Mercedes, of course, were champions quite a few races ago. Red Bull second. Racing Point, with one race to go, are now in third and are 10 points clear of McLaren. So, essentially, if Racing Point are as quick in Abu Dhabi as I think they'll be, and don't suffer any real bad luck, I think Racing Point will finish in third. McLaren fourth and then Renault fifth. I don't think Renault can possibly finish third. They're just too far behind. 22 points is quite a lot to make up with just one race to go. Ferrari obviously going to finish in sixth. AlphaTauri seventh. Alfa Romeo eighth. Haas ninth and Williams in 10th. So there you go. That is the Sakhir Grand Prix for you. But before I go, just want to let you guys know what the schedule is coming up for next week. So, there'll be no, most likely, there'll be no recorded videos coming next week between Monday and Friday. I am currently working on a recorded video that will most likely come out early the week after next. So, say 2 or 3 days after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, something like that. I mean, hopefully it can come out, say, Thursday, Friday next week, but realistically it probably isn't. I think you guys will like it once I, put it all together and make it in the style and way I want. I think you guys will enjoy it. Yeah, next weekend, I'm not going to be doing a qualifying reaction for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix qualifying session. So that'll be off the table. But this is what I'm going to be doing next Sunday. As my throat is dying. This is what I'm going to be doing next Sunday for the final race day of the season. So the race is at 1 p.m. or 10 past 1 p.m. UK time. And then it'll end about, 2:45? So then I'll be live around 4 to 4:15 p.m. UK time next Sunday for a race reaction to final race of the season, the 2020 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And then, once that stream is finished, which will be, 5:30, 5:45, I'm hoping to do another stream that night, about an hour after the race reaction finishes, where I am going to do a season review. A live stream season review, and hopefully bring Nib on with me. So yeah, for an hour and a half, 2 hours, we can just, shoot shit, talk about all the teams and everything in this season, get all our thoughts and feelings out there, and hopefully you guys will come along to that. I haven't actually asked Nib if he wants to come on for that yet, but I'm sure I will in the next couple of days. But that is the hope, is that me and Nib can do a stream next Sunday, which will be basically a season review. So if you want to hear our thoughts and all of that, then make sure to come along to that next Sunday night after the race reaction stream. And then after that, should be a recorded video 2 or 3 days after that, and then probably another recorded video around Christmas. But guys, thank you very much for coming along. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more content like this coming up this time next week. Down below you can subscribe or go to my channel page and do it. Don't forget to share this video absolutely fucking everywhere. Don't forget to like this video, comment down below. Don't forget to join my Discord server. That's down below in the description. That server is a great place to be on an F1 race weekend. It is very, very active. So if you want to interact with other F1 fans, make sure to join that server. Also, if you want to send me an email for any reason, chazzahdf1@gmail.com for any business reason. If you want something to do with the channel, or if you're struggling mentally or something like that, then you can hit me up on the email, and also Discord DM. I think that's it for today's stream. But yeah, thank you guys for coming along. Really appreciate it. And until the 2020 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the final race of what has been a mental year for life in general, of course. But what has been a mental season for Formula 1, it comes to a close next week. And I hope to see all you guys there, the race reaction and the season review. And until then, guys, has been me, ChazzaHD. Goodbye.